Hey. Just out of curiosity, who here uses Ember? And who here has never used Ember? Is anyone here that doesn't know anything about Ember? That's good. Cool. So I'm Pat. I'm a product engineer here. So in the last while, like talking with people have these kind of preconceptions of what Ember is. So I'm kind of just going to talk a bit about that and clear up some of those, hopefully clear up some of those preconceptions, and then maybe talk about some of the design decisions that go into Ember. So hopefully give you guys an insight as to what makes Ember. So one that people think, it's a monolith. So basically a monolith, it's this bloated framework with all this stuff you don't need. But if you think about the modern web app, what do you need? You need your components, you have your templates, you have your models, which back your components and your templates. So then, oh yeah, you want those automatically update, so you have your bindings. But you have all your models, but you want to share them between all your components and your screens, so you're going to need a data store and an identity cache. Oh, but then you need a router, because you want to decide what's on each of your screens and what components are in each screens. Oh, because you have a router, you're going to need proper URL support, because you don't want to break the back button. And then all that, you need build tools. You know, if you want DS6 or you have SAS. And if you're a good citizen, you're going to do testing. But you know, you're going to do unit testing, you're going to test your modules. But then you're going to do integration testing, where you're going to do functional testing on the app, where you're clicking through the app. And then after that, you want continuous integration, because every time you run your tests, you want to make sure that the app is going to production is in good form. Then after all that, you want to deploy it. But then when you deploy it, you want asset fingerprinting, because static assets, you want to bust the cache, make sure all your customers are getting the right assets. So Ember, like out of the box, provides all these. So you can pretty much call it a full stack front-end development framework. It calls itself like a framework for building ambitious web apps. So Ember has come at building web apps from a different area than other frameworks. So other frameworks try to solve the widget problem. So for example, React calls itself the V and MVC. Angular calls itself a toolkit for building frameworks, whereas Ember aims to be productive right out of the box. So everything that you saw on the last screen, pretty much when you install Ember CLI, which is the kind of new build tool environment, you get all that out of the box. The alternative to that is now you can create your own. There's no problem with that. But the problem with that is there's time and there's obviously money involved. Whether it's your money or it's your company's money. Also, are you confident that all those choices that you made for all your different libraries, are they going to work together? And then, you want to pick a router, there's 10 routers out there. Are you going to pick the right one? I guess with Ember, these are all kind of knowledge which has come up through the community, and people have decided that this is what works. So another one is, it's too opinionated. So if you come from a Rails background, this probably isn't too much of a big issue, but generally in the JavaScript community, people don't really like this. They like to kind of either make your own framework or, a la carte framework. But Ember, it uses the pattern of convention over configuration. So what that means is, out of the box, it comes with sensible defaults. But if you don't like those defaults, it's underpinned by flexible APIs, so you can break out at if you need to. So essentially, Ember is giving you this guidance to point you in the right direction, and hopefully reduce bike shedding, because you don't want to spend 2 weeks trying to decide whether you want gulp or grunt. So your app is not a beautiful snowflake. Yes, your application logic for your app is going to be different, but if you look at 10 different apps, they're all going to need essentially the same thing. You're going to have a router which is going to decide what's on screen. You're going to have models. They're going to hand them down to controllers, and then you're going to have your individual modules or your components. And then you have Ember CLI, which has emerged in the last year and bringing standardization of kind of build tools to Ember. So this gives a standard way and a kind of consensus among the Ember community. And what this has enabled is this kind of this ecosystem now of what are called Ember add-ons. So essentially, people are building all these libraries, and just simply with npm install, they're installed and ready to go in your app. So stuff like deployments, continuous integration testing against Sauce Labs, all this kind of sort of stuff. And then there's Ember Inspector. So because there's this convention around Ember apps, pretty much every Ember app is built exactly the same. So I'm here looking at Heroku, Discuss with the React forum, and Travis CI. They're all Ember apps, but I can open up DevTools console and I can view exactly how this app is built. And when Tom Dale came over to consult with us last year, he tweeted that within 5 minutes he was productive because we were following Ember conventions. He was pretty much, he knew exactly how the code base was put together. This is a strange one, but I've heard it. Someone saying that I can't use Ember because I don't use Rails. Completely getting by the fact that Ember is only a front-end framework, but there's definitely no prerequisite to use Rails. There's lots of people in the Rails community use it, and probably the fact that Yehuda Katz is on the core team, and he's also on the Rails core team, and it does take ideas of conventional configuration, but it's completely back-end agnostic. So out of the box you get Ember Data, which has recently come to 1.0. So basically this is an ORM type JavaScript library, and allows you to define your models, define relationships between all your models. It allows you to keep in sync with your server. There's a data store, so you're not making network requests all the time. And also it gives caching, so that, caching, and there's an identity map so that if you have lots of different components or views using those models, that that they're all using the same one, and that if one updates, that change flushes through the rest of them. So out of the box, you get adapters for REST and JSON API adapters. So if your APIs follow those standards, it pretty much works straight away. But if not, you can do custom adapters and serializers. So a really interesting one was this find.io. So basically this guy, he reverse engineered the iTunes store APIs and basically built a web interface for iTunes. So he gave a good talk at EmberConf last year about that. And also there's another one which a guy did this year where he basically did a Hacker News reader, and all he did was he scraped the Hacker News HTML and then kind of just loaded it into his models, and it just shows how flexible it is. So this is another one. It's slow because it's this big bloated framework, and it kind of is true in some cases. There's been some issues with re-rendering of really large lists, and we've had this kind of issue ourselves. But in the last probably 6 months to a year, there's been kind of a lot of work trying to make Ember faster. It's probably not there yet, but it's getting there, but it's definitely, I wouldn't call it slow. So I don't know if you guys seen, there was a talk this year from Ryan Florence at ReactConf. So he used to be a big Ember advocate, and then kind of jumped over to React because he just felt that Ember wasn't giving him what he wanted. So this pretty much name and shamed Ember. So Ember is on the left there, Angular's in the middle, and React's in the right. And this GIF doesn't really do it justice because the React side really flies along. So kind of after that, yeah, the core team kind of said, yeah, we really need to sort this stuff out. So, so one of the first changes was HTML bars. It was in development for a while, but it only kind of got released last year. So essentially, this is a variant of handlebars. So handlebars emits strings, which are kind of inefficient, whereas HTML bars emits DOM. And what that means is it understands your markup, so it understands where your bindings are, so whether they're in attributes or whether they're in elements. And it also enables you to cache your templates so that it can be reused later on. So that brought good speed improvements to Ember. The next one is Glimmer. So this is the big one which kind of emerged in the 1.13 release. So similar to how the Ember core team were kind of inspired by Angular's working components, they've been very inspired by how the React programming model. So they've implemented their own kind of DOM diffing library. So essentially it's re-renders are really fast, and it kind of does, it's, at the time it was, when it first came out, it was smarter than React in that it only did, it only updated parts of the DOM that it needed to, and React actually thought this was really cool, and they actually added it to React as well. And other things which it brings is that it's the one-way binding. Traditionally, Ember has two-way binding, and I remember myself when I first had two-way binding, I thought this is the best shit ever. And now, after I've come to the conclusion that two-way binding is pretty much evil. So Fastboot is something else, it's just kind of here, but it's in the pipeline. So this enables to do server-side rendering of your Ember app. So at the moment, there's a kind of content SEO version of this, where if you have a content site, this will work. So Bustle.com commissioned Yehuda Katz and Tom Dale to work on this, so it's just for a content site at the moment. But in the next few months, they're hoping to work on it more, so that what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to hydrate your app kind of in a certain state with using your models and all that, and then when it hits the front end, your JavaScript then will be able to pick up exactly where the back end left off. So that should be really interesting, and it should bring really good performance gains. So this is another one, like I've heard, but everyone else is using Framework X. So sometimes it feels in the JavaScript community it's almost like a popularity contest. I've heard the old, but if I put Angular into Google search, you get like many more hits. So Ember isn't really hip, but that's fine. And then sometimes it feels like there's another JavaScript framework arriving every day, and it's really at the saturation point of kind of JavaScript framework fatigue. So this kind of really good talk that was given by Brendan Hayes of FluentConf. So he talks about this hype cycle. So basically you have this technology trigger, which will be something arrives on Hacker News, and everyone just go, holy shit, I'm like 10 by productive, and I'm just like churning through code. That last framework I was using was useless. This is like the best thing ever. And yeah, so it makes you really productive. You think it's great. But then what ends up happening is 6 months down the line, while this new framework solved the last problems you had, this new framework is bringing along a whole new set of problems. And that's where you get the trough of disillusionment. And you either have two ways to go there. You can either wait for the next technology trigger and just carry this cycle of, oh, I'm going to find the next best thing, and then turns out it was crap, I'll get the next best thing. But the Ember community has kind of slogged on through this, this bottom curve. And now I can probably say that we're all in this plateau of productivity. It's taken a while, but it almost feels like this Ember 2.0 is kind of, it's going to be a really good release for Ember, kind of with Ember CLI and all the performance kind of coming down the line. So like just to show, like these are some of the companies which are using Ember. So all these companies have made bets on Ember. Like these are big, non-trivial apps, quite sizable. So like NASA released a site last week. The new iTunes music app is actually an Ember view inside of iTunes. Supposedly the new Microsoft Xbox account manager is Ember. And even here at Intercom, we have like 15 to 20 engineers who dip in and out of like Ember code all the time. So to have those same defaults and those conventions just allows us to, ship product faster and smarter. So this is another one, but Framework X was built by Corporation Y, so it must be good. But as you can see, like if you were a user of Batman.js, which was from Shopify, that got canned last year. And then there was the Angular 2 debacle, which basically Google said that they were going to just do a big bang rewrite of Angular, and they weren't going to have a migration path. But then everyone kind of kicked up a stink, and now I believe they have a migration path, but I'm not really sure. Sergey, you'll be able to tell us at the next talk in a few weeks. But yeah, so if you follow a framework which has a single gatekeeper, there's always going to be risks there. Ember, on the other hand, there's no single gatekeeper. They kind of follow the Postgres model of open source, where there's all these companies, and to ship features, you have to get consensus. You can't just say I'm gonna put this in there. And also another thing is that everyone on the core team, or all the developers anyway, they have to be building apps. They can't just be a library developer. They have to be building apps, so they have to know the pain of what an app building. So also on the core team, we have like docs writers and people who set for events and stuff. So actually getting features into Ember there's an RFC process. So it's very community driven. So it kind of follows the Rust language model, where if you want to, so anyone can just go to the GitHub repo, submit a pull request with your RFC and say, I want this in Ember. And then what will happen will be back and forth, discussions, and then at the end we'll work out whether we're going to put it in the library or not. So for example, the RFC for all the features in 2.0, that came out like probably 6 months ago, and there was like 300 comments or something like that, and yeah, it seems to work. And also a few weeks ago, there was the one for whether to drop IE8 and IE9 in Angular, or Ember 2.0 Angular. And it was after like feedback, they decided to keep IE9 because there was so much the community was actually needed IE9, so they're only dropping IE8 now. So this is kind of I've heard from people who used to use Ember back in the pre 1.0 days. So yeah, so there was a lot of churn when the core team were trying to work out what's the best abstractions for Ember. So with the router, for example, I think went through 2 major changes, and there was 2 major rewrites there, which kind of hurt a lot of people. And even Ember Data has only finally got to kind of 1.0 in the last month or so. But I think it's kind of worked out because the router in Ember is like really awesome. It's really cool, and so much so that I think Angular 2 has like a kind of a router which is based on it, and there's React router as well, which was written by Ryan Florence, who was mentioned earlier. He wrote a version of that for React, which is very, very similar. But once Ember hit 1.0, it follows semver very, very well. Like, so how the releases work, they follow a kind of release cycle the same as Chrome or Firefox, where every 6 weeks there's a new release. So you have at the end of a 6-week release cycle, you have the battle-hardened production-ready release, You have a beta, which is going to be the next release, and essentially, there'll be 4 or 5 betas in that time period where bugs will be flushed out. And then you have Canary, which is kind of like the batshit crazy one where, it's all these experimental features and feature flags. And there's this idea of stability without stagnation. So when Ember proposed the move to 2.0, because all the core team and users, they all have apps in production, they didn't want to have to do a big bang rewrite. So this idea is that the features which are going into 2.0 are actually in the 1.0 library. So they've been shipping 2.0 features in Ember since I think 1.8 or 1.9, and they've been shipping code that is going to be removed. It's shipping with deprecation warnings and basically saying in 2.0 this code is going to be removed. You should use the new style. So when 2.0 actually does come around, the difference between the two of them is there's actually going to be no new features in 1.13 and 2.0. The only difference is that they're going to be ripping out all the deprecation warnings and just all this cruft code that they've earmarked to remove. So just to wrap up, if you've never looked at Ember before, I'd highly recommend it, even just to give it a run along with whatever frameworks you're having a look at. So it's productive right out of the box, especially with Ember CLI and the community. Yes, it's opinionated, but if you have a big team, especially it really works well for us here, so there's less bike shedding, there's just these conventions that you can just follow. Just performance is good, but it's going to be better. And yeah, I guess it's truly open source. And yes, thanks. I hope that wasn't too much Kool-Aid. Questions? Oh, do you want to? Yeah, here.
I have just one question. If it's not a secret, what version of Ember do you use in production?
We're 1.11. Yeah.
And how painful to migrate to new version in your code?
We've got quite a large app, so it hasn't actually been that bad. We're having some problems now at the moment, migrating to 1.12 and 1.13. It doesn't actually. We actually were migrating, but we made the decision not to because there's some performance stuff which kind of has stopped us going further. But yeah, generally what happens is the team kind of splits up the app into their various parts, and you get a list of what you need to do, and each team just goes through, gets rid of all their deprecation warnings, and then at the end we have a nice PR which is ready to merge. Generally it's not too bad, but yeah, so we've actually said we're not going to go any further just until, I guess, 2.0 and that come around.
So in the end it will be 2.0?
Well, we're going to obviously make the incremental jumps because that means that we can get rid of the deprecation warnings. But I think 1.13 at the moment, there's some issues there that doesn't work well for us. So.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you.